So today is the 103rd Security Thought Leadership webinar. And we've been here every Tuesday and Thursday around this time where we've been debating a topic of central importance to the security world. And the idea of thought leadership is that we critique today, we examine what's going on, we think about it in order that in so doing, we have a better type of security tomorrow. That's what thought leadership is all about. And so in the next 45 minutes, we're going to be discussing the interesting topic, I think, of protecting the national infrastructure. Are we sure we have not been distracted? And what brought this about was this sense in which we haven't heard a lot about this in recent times. We know in the background criminals are active, and we know that companies have been distracted by COVID-19. So what's been going on protecting the national infrastructure? Are we happy that we're safe? Well, I've got some experts to talk to you, as I always have. So what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to first of all invite them to introduce themselves. And once they've done that, I'll then invite each of them to make their opening statement. Once they've done that, we'll come to you, the audience, to ask questions. So if I could invite you, please, to get your questions in early using the question and answer, the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you get your questions in early, we'll endeavour to incorporate you in the ensuing discussion. So without further ado, let me introduce our panellists. Let's get our panellists to introduce themselves, as is our way. And let's start with Stephen over in Moscow. Stephen.
Good day. Thank you, Martin. I'm Steve Lidstone. I'm Cluster Security Manager for Shell, covering the former Soviet countries, Russia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Turkmenistan, where we have a footprint, and other countries where we may have visitors traveling, but from the former Soviet Union.
Thanks you very much indeed, Steve. And then let's go to the UK and Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, and good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Andy Williams, originally a police officer in London, then I moved into working for the UK government for a short time. For the last 12 years, I've been the chief security officer at a Japanese bank called Nomura, but I also wear a couple of other hats. I've held some senior appointments within ASIS, and currently I'm the director and deputy chairman of TinyG, International Counter-Terrorism Sharing Network.
Thank you very much indeed. So two panelists. We've got Himani, we hope to join us. She's been called away on an urgent matter, I've just been told. And so she's tied up, but we're hoping she'll be able to join us at some point. Meanwhile, we're in the good hands then of Stephen and Andy. So what we'll do is we'll invite each of them to make their opening statement. Stephen, can I ask you first, please, for your opening statement?
I have to say that throughout the whole last year, we've been pretty active in monitoring the threat. And as a company, we are threat-led, risk-based. So we have to understand what the threats are before we look at the risk. They have changed, certainly they have changed, but I think we've been fairly active in responding to those as they've changed. And I believe, talking from colleagues in other countries, companies within the fuel and energy sector, that the same is true there as well. So yes, it's a changing landscape, but I think we're keeping up with it.
Okay, let's go from Steve then to Andy. Andy, your opening statement, please.
Okay, so I think the question was protection of national infrastructure. Are we sure that we've not been distracted? Well, I think the truth is, yes, we have been distracted. I think it's undoubtedly the case, but I don't think we've been dangerously distracted. I think as the security professionals that operate within national infrastructures, generally amongst the most experienced, well-trained practitioners, and it's our job to be ready for the unforeseen. It's our job to be risk assessing and identifying challenges that may present themselves from time to time. That's not to say that the national infrastructure has escaped scot-free from issues or dangers. Of course, they haven't. And while some of the senior members of those organisations may have had challenges, I think generally the security profession that operates within the national infrastructures are ready for the unforeseeable, unthinkable even, and through regular assessments, training, exercising, good communication, such as today, I think we are ready for that challenge. So there have been some there's been some undeniable impacts on every facet of our lives. And I think, perhaps part of that has been the need to deal with constant changes to guidance and rules, how companies can operate, when they're open, when they're not. Companies have been financially impacted, employees have been financially impacted, and those have presented challenges. But I don't think, as I say, I don't think it's been a disaster. And I think because we employ some great professionals in the industry, in the profession, we've been ready to face the challenge on the majority of occasions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. But let me just go back to Stephen, and Stephen, just get a clarification from you. When you say there's a changing landscape, what did you mean by those words?
Well, generally, security is about people. People cause the problems. And apart from perhaps information security, it's the contact with people that cause the greatest problems. With the COVID regulations causing issues around the world, there has been lesser contact, so fewer of those problems. For example, the current mode for terrorism in most countries is attacks on large numbers of people. And that's not happening because there are no large numbers of people. So although the authorities have been active in catching terrorists, it's all in the planning stages, and nothing has actually happened, apart from in some areas around the world, in Middle East, for example, where there have been attacks on infrastructure. And basically, we've had to shift our approach from looking specifically at the physical security side to more the communications and internet domain and the problems that are kicked up there.
From a terrorist perspective, Stephen?
Within my countries, it's actually well managed. Low, there may be some work behind the scenes that won't get published, but they do seem to be picking up groups, small cells of terrorists that are planning to make attacks, and these are usually low capability attacks. So not great problems with bombs going off, but knives, axes, guns maybe. We still haven't seen any vehicles used as ramming devices in my countries anyway.
No, and presumably, Stephen, the fact, as you say, there's no people out and about, and presumably that's a pretty good terrorist prevention measure, isn't it? The fact we're not allowed out.
Yeah, it works extremely well, but I don't think they'll continue it.
No, fair enough. Let's hope not. But I'm just trying to get sort of a context here. I mean, is that a big driver? The very fact that there just aren't the people out to attack. They're not in one place. They're not in a building. They're not in a street. They're not in a, there's not many on most places.
That's right. It's usually been festivals or communications hubs that have caused the attraction of terrorists, and because there are fewer people in those places, then it's a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, presumably, Andy, I mean, you're obviously very well connected through the sort of Tiny G network on this. I mean, what are the big issues emerging from conversation with colleagues there about the threat and the nature of the threat? I mean, because we're not seeing much in the public domain, which is slightly reassuring, I hope.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that there is no doubt that the terrorists they haven't gone away. They are by virtue of the thing that Steve just described. They're sort of kept in abeyance at the moment. They're planning. There's no question about that. They're using the opportunity and the time that they have to consider what their actual future action is going to be. But I think potentially what we've got here is a similar scenario to that which is described in health service terms at the moment, where as a consequence of COVID, there's been a drastic reduction in other infectious disease, communicable diseases. So the flu hasn't killed as many people as it normally would, not because suddenly we've got a cure for the flu, but because people haven't been out communicating and spreading flu in the way that they normally would have done during the cold weather and flu season. So actually, we've got a similar thing with terrorism. They've not been able to go out and have their big wings because people haven't been in public spaces and other areas where they would like to have one of their atrocities. So just as flu hasn't gone away, terrorism hasn't gone away. They've just not been able to be as active as they ordinarily would. And certainly the concern within the counter-terrorism world is that it's a case of when and not if that the next atrocity will take place. And certainly we were very fortunate to have Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu on one of our webinars a week or so ago, and he's very clear that the police service with responsibility for counter-terrorism internationally are they're working collectively on the basis that once we get to whatever normal is, that the terrorists will certainly attempt to resume their atrocities and their actions.
Yeah, I mean, is there any sense, Andy, in which this break has given them a chance to think, a chance to coordinate, a chance to plan, or the opposite? I'm just trying to get a sense of how it's been. I mean, we know that organised crime certainly hasn't gone away, and that they're behind the scenes sort of adapting. I mean, is there a sense in which they're going to come back with some almighty whack against us, which is we should be worried about?
They'd certainly like to. I mean, we've had. If you think from going back to things like 7/7, 9/11 before that, and 7/7, so the big group multi-participant attacks, we've seen the move towards lone actors and self-radicalised jihadis and the rest of it. But there's no doubt that there is a network. These people do operate within networks, and they help each other to train. They help each other to influence their ideas. And it's absolutely true that they are continuing to communicate, because just as we can communicate using electronic gadgetry, so can they, and they always have, and they always will. So yeah, there's no question they are looking for an opportunity when it presents itself. But the other difficulty is that the great public very often have short memories, and so when we get to the stage where we can all freely go about our business and back to pubs and restaurants and bars and sporting events, my concern is that some members of the public will somehow forget the lessons that we've learned previously after the events in Paris and London Bridge and the Borough Market. Some people will go out and they'll be so enthralled about the potential to go out and enjoy themselves with their friends again that they'll forget actually to take those kind of sensible precautions that perhaps they might have done prior to the lockdown. And the bad guys are going to be looking out for that. And by bad guys, we're not just talking about terrorists. All kinds of criminal activity will resume when people resume.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Andy. I mean, I wonder, is there therefore a plan of action to raise awareness amongst the public, almost starting from scratch, perhaps, about be careful, this is what you need to look out for? Just a reminder.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's one of the things that at Tiny G, that's one of the things once we have clarity on when things do start happening, and we're going to certainly be promoting our own and the police, law enforcement's messages for them. We need the public to understand that terrorism hasn't gone away just because COVID's kept us off the streets and kept them off the streets. Terrorism exists in all of the previous forms. They're looking for an opportunity, and opportunities will present themselves as people get back out there. So we will certainly be supporting the message from NACSO, from National Counterterrorism Policing, and our international law enforcement partners around the world, as you know, we operate internationally. So yeah, absolutely, that message, that kind of re-education or reminder, just to be careful, just to not to leave yourself open to unnecessary risk. That's the kind of thing, that's the message. And I think but it's something that needs to go into all walks of life for all kinds of criminality. People need to remember that the bad guys and girls are out there, and we need to just take those sensible measures that perhaps we took before almost subconsciously.
Yeah.
But we've got out the habit of doing to some extent.
Okay. Well, let's get to some questions then. If you've got a question, please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll endeavour to include you. So, Stephen, let's come to you first. And Brian Sims, who's a well-known journalist and indeed himself has been a panelist on one of these webinars, has said, when it comes to the critical national infrastructure protection, do you feel the present threat is greater online or in physical space? Now, you alluded to this earlier. You mentioned the online threat, Stephen. So I'll ask you first, and I'll come to you, Andy. What is the greater worry right now, Stephen?
I think it's online, definitely. I think the threats to the company have diminished across out the spectre. Within Shell, we look at 7 different threat categories, and online, certainly the information security side is greater, but a lot of that is targeted at individuals rather than at the company itself. So
what do you mean? Just explain what you mean.
Well, a lot of it is phishing attempts to get into personal computers and take bank information, for example, or social engineering to try and use the maybe even use the COVID situation to get somebody's trust and get to know them and then steal information from them. And generally, from what I see, it's for financial gain.
So more than terrorist. So that's not so much a terrorist issue.
No.
No, okay.
Not within my countries. And I appreciate what Andy's saying. Within Russia, for example, it's a multicultural society, and all religions live happily with each other. But there are some migrant populations that come here and are generally the problems come from them.
Okay,
it's a large diaspora, so it's difficult to spot all of them.
no, that's fine. So Andy, just very specifically, Brian's question about whether it's physical or online, specifically with regards to the terrorist threat. What's your thoughts on that?
The threat of terrorism, by its very nature, of blowing things and people up, is a physical threat in the sense that you can virtually blow things up, but it doesn't have the same impact. So what we're talking about really, I think, is there is a significant increase in the use of IT technology to raise funds. So terrorism financing, for example, just like any other serious organised crime, they are very, very competent and capable in using computer equipment, IT, to generate funds, and that through fake websites, through it be phishing attacks, whatever it may be. All the same sort of things that other IT criminals use. Terrorists do the same thing. The impact is different though, because terrorism, is all about is about disrupting people's lives because of their political aims or their political views to achieve the changes they want to achieve through acts of terrorism, and that can only really be done by impacting on humans. Coming back to Steve's point about humans are the problem, but they're also the victim in this sense. So they're the only victim. You can impact on a computer, you can blow a computer up, it's not going to die. It's not going to be hurt in the way that a person would be. So, no, terrorism is only ever going to be in relation to people, assets. Don't get me wrong. Buildings cause a problem when buildings are blown up, but actually, it's terrorism. Terrorists are targeting people and their possessions, not virtually.
Okay, fair enough. Steve, let's go back to you. And a question from Matt Thorpe. Again, slightly somewhat overlapping something you've already raised. So interesting this context. And you said that so far we focused on the terrorist threat. You've just mentioned the fact about crime more generally. And I guess the extent that what Matt wants to know is the extent to which crime is a significant risk for the national infrastructures. Your thoughts, Stephen?
It certainly can be. If it stops us operating, then it can be a risk to the national infrastructure. We tend to fuel the other parts of the infrastructure that need to continue working. So if we can't do that, then yes, it can cause problems. Not sure what else to say from that. It definitely an issue.
I mean, I guess the point is, I mean, when we first spoke about it, Steve, one of the sort of interesting points I was keen to get you on is because of the fact that you are in the energy sector, which of course is a very clear part of the national infrastructure. I mean, if that goes wrong for some reason, we're in dire trouble. And I suppose it's the extent to which, I mean, how possible is it for a terrorist to wipe out energy supply to an area or to a group? Because that would send out a big message and would instill a lot of fear, wouldn't it, if that were to happen?
Generally, there's redundancy in the system, so it would be out for a while, and yet it would cause problems. Certainly, cause problems here in the winter. And there are times when there's no electricity in towns in the depth of winter, and that's potentially very serious. Fortunately, it hasn't happened. There have been a couple of attacks in the last 15 years on hydroelectric power stations, but nothing seriously on the infrastructure apart from that.
And why not? I mean, is that because you're doing a brilliant job? I mean, joking aside, is it because because presumably that would be a very welcome achievement for a terrorist, wouldn't it, to wipe out an area? Because most of us who are not in the specialist game would be concerned about, well, where does that lead to?
I don't think they have the seriously high capability to attack something at that level. So what most of the people, again, in my area are looking at is attacks on people, because they have the easiest impact in a very short space of time, rather than plan a complex attack on a power station, which is possibly guarded, may even have armed guards. And therefore maybe not necessarily a high level of success. So better to go for something that's a lot easier. And fortunately, apart from in the Middle East, they don't seem to be attacking the fuel and energy sector at the moment.
No. Okay. Andy, same question to you from Matt Thorpe. And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because one might have thought, Andy, that in the absence of people being about, there would have been a lot more attacks on other types of target. And if terrorism's not possible, then let's attack the infrastructure through other sorts of crimes, because that's going to attract publicity and damage be a damage in the psychology, the worry for people. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree almost entirely with Steve, but I don't want to just say ditto, because that would be easy. But actually, you know, the truth is that criminals, organised crime gangs, to differentiate them from terrorists, albeit, you know, terrorists are organised criminals, but non-terrorist organised criminals in this sense, you know, it's their way of living, isn't it? Crime, organised serious crime is their way of living. It's how they generate their incomes and how they live and how they pay their bills and how they pay their staff. So they can't just stop doing it. And they will look to identify vulnerabilities in opportunities where there are vulnerabilities inherent in their organisation, security or whatever it may be. I suspect, and I've got no actual evidence for this, but I suspect that they would probably find targeting the national infrastructure type organisations more challenging than they would organisations that have perhaps less sophisticated security systems and processes in place. I think the rise of computer-enabled crime to fleece Granny of her £100,000 savings by sending out a spoof email and getting her bank details is safer and easier generally to sort of, and that kind of more domestic type crime is probably going to be easier for them to manage than trying to break into either physically or virtually break into a national infrastructure organisation that will have, either because of regulation or compliance or both, will generally have pretty good levels of security, multi levels of security, that will stop all but the most determined. they will get in, of course, but I don't think. But again, these serious organised crime gangs. I mean, these are professional organisations that have teams and teams of people internationally that operate to sort of look for revenue streams downstream. So they're looking for. They're not going to stop just because of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, let's stay with you, and then I'll come to Stephen second in this. But Dennis Shep's got a question, Andy. I mean, and I guess maybe you've gone some way to answering it. But I mean, is there any indication in your network? Are you aware of innovating and looking at a manufactured or stolen virus as a potential risk? Because we've heard a bit about this, haven't we? About sooner or later someone's going to do this, and wow, wouldn't that instill a bit of fear and worry and potentially damage? I mean, but thoughts, is that something you're worried about?
I think whether there is actually the potential to create a man-made version that could cause problems or not, I'm not qualified to say. I suspect possibly there may be some very clever people out there that are trying to, but at the very least, the thought of another virus or a man-made virus, whether natural or man-made, is of huge concern to probably the entire population of the world now. And actually, whether it exists or not, the very fear or threat of it existing may be enough to cause some people to change the way they live their lives. And if you think back, I think the three of us on this call speaking are old enough to remember the worst days of the IRA in the UK in the 60s, 70s and 80s and 90s. There was a term used then, as you may recall, of 10p terrorism, which was somebody using a code word would phone up an organisation, give an IRA recognised code word, and say, for example, I don't know, there's a bomb at Liverpool Street Station that's set to go off in 15 minutes' time. Well, there wasn't a bomb there. There never was a bomb there. But the very threat of the call was enough to have Liverpool Street evacuated, and that caused massive disruption to probably a 500-metre, area around it. But therefore, the bad guys know now that they can potentially look to generate the fear that comes from a pandemic. The terrorists will know that if they can generate some kind of dirty virus, or the threat of a dirty virus, that may be enough to stop some people living their lives in the way that they ordinarily would. So
and it would have an impact that way, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Stephen, let me come to you. So, human-made viruses. So, we're talking about just your thoughts on this. I mean, I guess perhaps no one knows, but your thoughts. Is this a worry in your circle?
It is a constant worry, yes, and we have a department that looks specifically at attacks on the system to see whether there are serious penetrations into the system through the internet. What I would look at is who actually gains from an attack on our system, and very often when you're looking at a complex hack into a well-protected system, then you're looking at beyond just organized crime. Usually they're fairly low down in the sophistication order. So would anybody have any benefit of getting into our systems? Only to mess us around, I would think. So yes, it is possible. There are some groups that would like to do that. But the more sophisticated people that could get in there, and we're looking at maybe not the individual hacker, but state organizations. We have the support of the local government because we have partners in the local government. And, I think between us, we will be able to stop most of what's going on. I'd just also like to get back to a point that Andy mentioned about basically bomb hoaxes. Those have actually continued unabated through the virus. They have changed, the targets for those have changed, and they've even included a few airplanes that are still flying, and hospitals of all things. But there's certainly that side of the terrorist threat, but I'm not sure whether it's actually spreading terror, because I don't believe many people take them too seriously anyway. I think it's more a hindrance than anything else.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's an interesting point. Okay, and let's go back to you. And an interesting question from Keith Nielsen. And Keith's point, it seems that both of you, in fact, I'll come to Stephen afterwards, but Andy first. He says, but you are saying that terrorists are waiting, marking time, preparing for the current lockdown to end. So how quickly do you think they will surface as the lockdown eases worldwide? And will the countries that ease down first get the first wave, for example? Interesting point. Andy, your thoughts?
I don't know. Perhaps I've not worded this particularly well. I don't know that they are actually marking time. I think their opportunity to strike is limited at the moment. So if an opportunity presented itself tomorrow while we're still in restrictions caused by COVID, then they would take it. I've no doubt about that at all. But in terms of that specific scenario, their primary targets are the same regardless. They want to attack predominantly Western interests, wherever in the world that might be. They want to cause maximum terror by striking at not necessarily government or military or police targets, but at members of the public in a theatre or whatever it might be. So wherever that opportunity presents itself, if there is a radicalised group or individual of actors there who are intent on committing an atrocity, they will take it up. Now, I suppose on the law of averages, it's fair to say that if, using the UK as an example, and I've got no evidence for this, again, this is just my opinion, but if the UK comes out of lockdown ahead of some other developed nations, and we start to have our theatres open again and our sporting events open again, and there happens to be a radicalised group or individual that is intent on committing an atrocity, then the first opportunity for them to do it may be where we are. But that's not necessarily, the two things don't automatically align. So there's a very good chance that they'd be planning to do something in the UK on that basis, but doesn't automatically follow.
Okay, thank you. Let's get your thoughts, Stephen, from your world. I mean, interesting about how soon we might expect something to happen. I mean, are they just ready to pounce? Stephen, your thoughts, your intelligence?
Well, every country is different. And within every country, if there is a terrorist threat, then the threat actors are also different. The way they operate and what they look for as targets. So the issues that you've had in UK have not been resonated here in my countries, either in Russia or Kazakhstan, for example. And I would find it unlikely that sort of thing would happen. We obviously do follow the activity in other countries, and take the authorities take measures to make sure that there's no ramming incidents, for example, if there's a major event. But I'm not sure that they'll be rushing out to cause terrorist attacks. I think they will look around for an opportunity, and sometimes it's those opportunities that present themselves because there are large festivals or specific events that would get more coverage than otherwise.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, we've got lots of questions coming in. I want to try and get through them, so we may get back onto it, but let's move on. So, Andy, let's think about the response for a minute. And Mike Cummings, who's a former panelist, actually, has said there have been so many ongoing natural disasters we've had to deal with over the past couple of years, which have caused us to react. Do either of you think there are lessons for preparing for human-made attacks? And I think the point is, Andy, is that one, we've learned from the COVID crisis that by and large, many countries and organizations, however well prepared they might claim, were not prepared for something lasting this long, and that plans were disrupted accordingly. And I just wonder whether how prepared we are for what comes next in a post-COVID-19 environment with regards to terrorism, because we haven't had that before either. It's a new experience. Can we learn from dealing with previous events for this, Andy?
It's absolutely essential that we do.
But it doesn't mean to say we will.
No, absolutely. Well, no, they're true. I mean, if we look around the world at COVID just for a second, and we look at the response from some government organisations in some countries, there have been good and bad. You know, countries like South Korea and Japan and China, as far as we can tell, seem to have got a handle on some of those issues. As far as we can tell from media, they've got a handle on the spread of it and got it under control. We took a long time to get a handle on it in this country, but how we dealt with the vaccination process has been world leading. And so we got good and we got bad. I think what's really important is to understand collectively what each country did well and bad afterwards. What lessons can we learn as a group of nations to say, well, South Korea did that bit brilliantly, but they didn't do this so well. UK did this terribly, but they did that excellently. And then let's look at a plan. So that's the first thing. I mean, that would be the ideal outcome. In terms of terrorism, the terrorism has, in the last 20 years, has changed enormously, as we all know. Who thought in the 8th of September 2001 that what we saw in New York would happen? You know, it was unthinkable until the day before. Now, there would have been people from the security world that thought it was a possibility, but unlikely. So it was a changing dynamic environment, and what comes next is limited by the imagination and opportunity of the bad guys. So nothing should be beyond the reach of possibility, beyond the reach of the imagination. What we have to learn from, I think, is more along the lines of, without being political, I think it was in 2016 the UK government did some deep dive research into what it would need to handle a major pandemic in this country, and it was advised it needed X, Y, and Z. And lo and behold, it didn't get X, Y, and Z in place. So we had the pandemic, and we weren't well enough equipped with things like PPE to go and respond immediately. So our first responders, our hospital staff, didn't have what they needed. Well, that should be a massive lesson learned for the government. Well, if a pandemic on this scale is possible again now, we know it's happening. First time something like this happens, well, okay, that's unforeseen, fair enough. You can't ever allow that to be taken for granted again. And I think the same thing exists in terrorism or any other response to a mass event such as this. We need to understand what other countries are going through. We need their intelligence to be first rate, to be well understood. We need our ears and eyes wide open, listening, looking, learning, so that even if we didn't anticipate a specific event, we are prepared for events on that scale, whatever that might be. I don't think we could do more than that realistically.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to come to Stephen, because Stephen, I guess in your case, you're a professional, you're in charge of an organisation, it's your full-time sort of commitment. One can expect that. Yes, you would be ready. I mean, perhaps I'd expect you to say that. I suppose it's the extent to which you think the countries are ready, the ones that you're responsible for, and are alert and are geared up for being ready for the post-COVID-19 in terms of potential threats to the infrastructure. Stephen?
We tend to look at the threat continually. And part of the reason for doing this is that we understand that if there are serious incidents, then we may be taken by surprise if we're not ready for it. And I'm a little bit concerned that sometimes there are serious security incidents. Within my sector, for example, in Algeria, 10 years ago, there was an attack on a large facility and a lot of people killed. Fortunately, not within my company, but certainly BP and Statoil, as was, suffered from that. And across the industry, we started taking measures and using their experience to put in extra plans. I think there's dust on some of those plans now.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful that we're not forgetting that.
Okay, let me guess. I want to get a question to each of you because I'm conscious that we've got some questions. We're running out of time. Andy, a question for you is from. I hope I can say this right. So excuse me if I get it wrong. Bethet Simbaz. My apologies if I haven't got the pronunciation. I'm sure I haven't.
Ekchet Chimbaz.
Thank you so much.
Colleague of mine.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Well, you at least you've put me right. Andy, drone threats by terrorist groups. Now that is illegal. I'm going to ask you to be fairly quick because we're running out of time, Andy. But that strikes me as, should we be worried?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, drones are incredible pieces of kit. Very relatively cheap, relatively simple to use, capable of getting very close in a relatively undetectable way. I think the thing which was it 18 months ago now, we had an attack at Gatwick Airport, or an alleged attack by drones at Gatwick Airport. It brought Gatwick Airport and most of the south of England airspace wise to a complete halt for 2 or 3 days. Now that was just a protest, but actually that could easily have been terrorists. Yeah, drones are a major issue. There are some countermeasures out there for them, yeah, we cannot underestimate the potential use of drones in a terrorist attack.
Okay, and let me just come back to you, Stephen, and from Malcolm Baker. And he's just asking about the extent to which the threat has either diminished by virtue of COVID-19 or reduced the capability of terrorists specifically. But do you think their intent may have changed as a consequence of COVID-19 specifically? Any evidence, any insight on those issues?
No evidence whatsoever from my viewpoint that the focus has changed. I think the target has changed. The target is not there, so for that reason there have been fewer incidents.
Okay, and Andy, your thoughts on this about Malcolm's point is whether the intent may have changed or anything changed as a direct result of COVID on the way terrorists are planning and thinking?
Well, Malcolm probably knows more about terrorism than most people I've ever met in my life, and I've met a lot, so I would take his view entirely. But I agree entirely with Stephen. This is about opportunity, about the availability of target. They certainly still want to do some very bad things, and when an opportunity arises, whatever that may look like, if they have the capability, they'll deliver it. Yeah,
okay. And Malcolm does make the point that indiscriminate biological attack is surely the preservative of a state attack, not a group, seemingly. And of course, states get involved in terrorist activities too. I'm going to ask for each of you, just in the last minute, just sort of 20 seconds each. As we go to this, we're beginning to think COVID-19 now. What do you consider to be the main issues that we as a society, as a country, should be considering, thinking about in terms of concern about a terrorist attack? So if I can ask you to put the hat on as a country almost, what should our next priorities be? Where should our thinking be? Stephen first.
As I said earlier, the countries that I cover, they're looking constantly at the potential terrorist threat. Sometimes I think they overplay it a little bit because there haven't been any serious incidents for some years now. To be honest, there are more people killed on the roads every day than there are annually in terrorist attacks. So there are other things that they need to be concerned about. I can't see any surprises coming from the terrorist side. I think the drone issue is a potential issue, certainly. As technology improves, then they have a greater payload that they can carry, but the capability that we're seeing is not bombs. So in fewer instances, bombs and bombs delivered with precision. So I'm not sure necessarily that that's going to be the case here.
Okay, thank you very much. Just 20 seconds, wouldn't mind, Andy. We're running out of time.
Yeah, I think we've got to consider that the terrorists are generally actually quite clever people. They're looking at uses of technology to enable their end game. They are looking for ways of causing the most terror to the recipients of it, and nothing is off the table.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Listen, we could have gone on. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for your insights and Very, 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 very interesting. I'm sure we're going to come back to this in future webinars. Thank you very much indeed to the audience as well for both your questions and your observations. Just a few final comments from me. Just take 30 seconds if I might. Just to say that the OSPAs are open around the world. They close in South Africa tomorrow. So if you're in South Africa, you've got to get your interest in by tomorrow evening. Kenya, Romania, and the United States, they're open. So you've still got a bit of time. Do though, keep watch because more will be opening soon. Just to say, we've announced now the Cyber Outstanding Security Performance Awards. It's an international awards, a focus on cyber security. Leading associations around the world are taking part. So if your association is not there, get them to contact us because cyber is about to go public soon. So look out for that. It's a big opportunity around the world to recognize cyber security professionals. On Thursday, we're back at the same time. Our topic is, what will the return to work look like? What are the implications for security, knowing what we do now and given where we are in the world? So we've got 3 experts, looking forward to speaking to them about their insights. So once again, thank you very much indeed again to you, the audience, for your questions and for your comments, especially to Stephen and Andy for engaging us with their insights and their expertise. Don't forget, a copy of this webinar will be on the website tomorrow and with a blog that I'll write to go with it. So once again, wherever you are in the world, until we see you again, stay safe.